Okay, hi guys. This is a chat about the economy. I'm going to be talking mainly in economic and financial terms, but in the second half, I'm going to do the astrology and look at the charts. I want to talk in general at first because there might be people watching this who are not really interested in astrology, and therefore I want to address things that will apply to everyone, all interest groups. Now, I feel that in the alternate media, there has been not a lot of people talk about the economy. Obviously, we know everyone's talked about the impacts of all the other medical stuff, on and on and on, every in and out of that ad nauseum, but not a lot of people are talking about the economy, to my knowledge, anyway. And so that's why I wanted to talk about the economy. So, just to kick start it, I think we are entering a phase now of leaving the free market. Now, in this country, we have Boris Johnson, who's talking about all these social reforms. He's also bringing in things like you won't be no longer be able to buy a petrol or diesel car from a certain date. You will no longer be able to have a gas boiler or gas in your home. You will have to move to full electric or use a heat pump. So we are now getting to the point where the government is directing the economy. It's making certain aspects of the economy illegal, so the sale of certain motor cars, etc. And it's legislating or planning to legislate under all this green nonsense for certain rules which will impact the free market. So we are now moving from a free market economy to a planned economy, which is communism. Do you see how this works? But that's a discussion for another day. I just wanted to add that in. I was triggered to think about this by someone who posted that, wow, the GDP of the UK has really soared this year. What, like compared to last year when everything was closed for months and months? And then I began to think to myself, this GDP, is this actually a good measure, the economy, even if you do it per head or per capita? And I thought, no, it isn't. What is GDP? It's the value of all the goods and services sold in the economy. But I'm going to look at another measure, and that's the tax actually raised in the economy, because I think that's a much better measure of where we're actually heading. I think GDP is so subject to manipulation. I mean, they've always said, isn't that the reason why the government loves mass immigration? Because it artificially pushes up the GDP. Also, we've got the fact that they're saying there's only about 65 million on the last census, more like 74 million on this census, but I think it's more like 82 million. That's what Tesco, Sainsbury's and Asda think the population is. So that's also distorting it, because they're going to give it per capita for, say, 65 million. Meanwhile, we've got a population probably closer to 84 million. But in terms of GDP, when the government engaged in large-scale infrastructure projects, white elephant in many cases, like HS2, this is creating a massive purchasing of goods and services, which is pushing up GDP. But is it creating value? And then I think another thing is they say GDP, for the last year and a half, huge amounts of people have been purchasing goods and services with their furlough money. So the government is literally printing up or inventing money so people can purchase on goods and services. So is GDP a good measure when people are spending phantom money that was not received from gainful employment? Because we've broken the tie now between money being spent in GDP and productivity, because so many people are getting, or were getting, and probably will be getting when we go into future lockdowns, this kind of free money. And that's when inflation should begin to spiral, because that essential link between productivity, or the creation of value, and earning money and then spending money has been broken. And that can only be detrimental to the economy. There's no two ways around that. You can't wish that away. So that's a problem. Then I'm thinking again, when you have such a huge thing like the NHS, which is employees, I think it's the Chinese army employ the most amount of people, then it's something else. Then the NHS employ, in terms of institutions globally that employ people, I think NHS is number 3. At one stage it was number 2 in terms of the amount of people it employs. The NHS expends a vast amount of resources, but a lot of these are wasteful, or don't represent value for money, because as you know, in these government institutions, when they have to do, well, someone's sitting there in procurement and they have to order paper clips, and they ring up the guy at the paperclip factory and he says, well, I can give you 3,000 paper clips for £20, or I can give you 30 golden paper clips for £1,000. And the guy in the procurement in NHS will say, yeah, what the hell, give me one of each. Because that's how it works. There's no incentive to lower costs, because they can always pump more from the government. And that's why I say part of the GDP is spending on the NHS, or within the NHS, on NHS outsourcing services, and it's not productive. It's wasteful spending. Therefore, I don't think it's a good reflection of true value in the economy. Then we get the fact that we have 1,000 immigrants coming over the channel, plus there are immigrants coming from other source areas. They are all being put up in hotels. That's contributing to GDP. They've been giving them pocket money. That's contributing to the GDP. Now, people might say that's relatively small. Well, who knows? When you add it to the list of people who are unemployed and who are all on furlough and all getting this free money to pump back into the economy, but again, it's not linked to productivity. It all means one thing. This GDP is a nonsense measure, and everything's like heading south as far as I'm concerned. Also, another way GDP is distorted is because we have the top 1% or 0.1% are getting richer and richer and richer. So in the UK, we have a large proportion of people who are extraordinarily wealthy, right, and can afford to spend a lot. So they're doing an awful lot of spending there at the top. It's dragging up the averages, but again, it only the GDP. It's not representing a spread of wealth across the country. It's quite top heavy. So I just don't see this as a good measure. So first article that I'm going to look at here, and I'm not going to look at it in detail. It's Simon Dolan, who wrote an article for Conservative Woman. And he, of course, Simon Dolan, a successful business person, right? This is what he said at the beginning of this year. UK businesses are hanging by the skin of their teeth among the continuing lockdown measures. He said the Federation of Small Businesses reported that at least 250,000, that's 250,000 small businesses will collapse in 2021 unless more support is offered to them under the current restrictions. This would bring the total number of small and medium-sized enterprises that have folded since the start of the pandemic to an estimated 470,000. Do you see the immense damage that this is doing to the economy? Now, this is highly underreported. So, as he says, these small and medium businesses account for more than 50% of private sector turnover. They are the growth engine that leads to innovation and provides new sources of employment. So damaging that sector is literally killing the future of the economy. And are they going to spring up again? Well, would anyone want to invest money in a business with the current amount of uncertainty and more lockdowns pending, and watching what's going on in Australia and seeing that that's more than likely? And what about Israel? We've all seen that the way out of it isn't what they said was the way out of it, right? So he talks about how time and time again these businesses have to dust themselves off and start again, constantly adapting. And he said the 12-month interest-free period on emergency COVID loans comes to an end in March. And so businesses who are already hanging at a thread are now having to absorb the interest payments that are going to hit them, right? And bearing in mind, because of social distancing, certain businesses are impacted because they can't get the footfall. And there's just been a change of buying habits, change of the way a lot of people are still fearful. So we haven't sprung back to normal. And as we know, as soon as winter hits, we're going to be going into this all again. So there we go. There's one of the things that I wanted to talk about, which I think represent a serious, serious challenge for the economy going forward. Okay, so as I was saying, I think GDP is a really rubbish measure of how an economy is doing. What I think is more important is how much money is the government actually bringing in. And so let's have a look at this Guardian article. It's quite interesting, just to go back to, very interesting actually. Here you go, you can see the Guardian. This goes back to Wednesday, 22nd of November 2017. Date isn't really important because we're looking for the gist of this. So it talks here about total revenue that government gets in through taxes. Look, you can see it's 769 billion. That's what they raise in taxes. To me, that's a more important measure than GDP. But listen to this. It talks about the national debt has ballooned to 1.6 trillion. So they only get in at 769 billion. The debt is 1.6 trillion, equivalent to nearly 80% of GDP, and it is forecast to keep rising for 2018, but no one knew how much it was going to rise because of, COVID. So it says this vast sum is offset, listen to this, by wealth, largely in bricks and mortar of more than 8 trillion. So they're talking about offset by whose wealth? The government? Do the government own bricks and mortar worth 8 trillion? Well, we know Gordon Brown got rid of all our gold in the UK when the price was at a record low. So we definitely don't have assets in terms of gold. So I was thinking, what do they mean by that? The vast sum of the national debt is offset largely by bricks and mortar. Well, let's have a look. Let me get up the next article. This time you can see we've gone over to a BBC article, and it says here, government assets are worth 307 billion. Now, this article is actually from 2007, right? But I would guess the government assets have been sold off and are probably less than that, but still, 337 billion. Well, that's not 8 trillion, right? So the government owns assets worth this 337 billion. The Treasury has calculated. The Ministry of Defence topped the list of departments in terms of what it owns. The Department of Transport owns the second highest amount of assets, blah, blah, blah. Domestic assets include Edinburgh Castle. It's probably been sold to BlackRock by now, who knows. Barracks, museums, ranges throughout the country. Defence transport assets as well, including Hercules transport aircraft. So these are the kind of assets. There are also antiques and works of art that the government own, and NHS Foundation trusts are included there, blah, blah, blah. Interesting. But that's a huge shortfall. That's not 8 trillion. So the 8 trillion is your home. Your home that you think you own is probably collateral for the government debt. So when they're talking about that, that's why they say you will own nothing, because they've put everything on the line here. And that's why people talk about BlackRock will own your home, Blackstone, all these private equity funds. So that 8 trillion is the value of individual properties, personal properties, people's houses, and of course it could be included to savings if they do a bail-in like they did in places like Cyprus, where they actually went into your savings and raided them to pay government debt. So I think that's kind of interesting, isn't it, if you look at it like that. So let's pause and get the other article back. Okay, this is back to the Guardian article. It's discussing where all the tax revenue comes from. So the total was 769 billion. That was 2018, right? Business rates 30 billion. Income tax. Now, income tax is the biggest amount, 185 billion. So that's where they get the highest individual amount in terms of their incomings. National insurance is very big as well. It's the second highest, 134 billion. So that's all coming from us, guys. Then excise duties. Corporation tax. Now, I'm really shocked that corporation tax only accounts for 55 billion. Now, I'm not a big fan of like taxing companies to the hilt. I understand that the more that you tax certain companies, the less you're bringing in revenue. But I think too many companies are taking advantage of tax dodging systems that we already know, like the Amazon, Starbucks. They've all got these little arrangements where they're sending money around the house all over the show and avoiding the tax. So I think that's an area that needs a huge amount of improvement. Because when you think about it, in terms of income tax, a lot of people who sole traders have a company and they take most of their profits, dividends out the company rather than as a salary, as a tax thing. So that seems very, very low. VAT was the second highest, actually very high, but that's all our spending. Council tax, pretty high. You see, they're getting most of this money off the taxpayer. They're not getting it off all the big corporations, are they? I mean, not that I want to sound like a communist or anything, but it seems proportionally a little bit low. And then other taxes, 86 billion. Other non-tax, 51 billion. But now, in terms of COVID, business rates, that's taken a massive, it's going to take a massive hit because 50 high street shops or high street businesses are closing down per week. So that they're going to take, because of COVID and the knock-on small businesses and shop owners and the high street business rates, there's going to be a massive knock-on business rates. So they're going to be taking far, far less there. Income tax, far less, with people not working, with the furlough scheme, with people's income being dramatically affected by this whole lockdown scenario, the rules, everything. That's going to take a massive hike, a massive hit. National insurance, well, Boris wants to put it up, but still, again, with less people employed, companies employing less people not taking a salary, that's going to take an enormous hit. Excise duty, I'm not sure how that will be affected with Brexit. Corporation tax, well, that's also going to be down, but maybe less so because we know the biggest companies haven't really been as much affected. VAT, well, can you imagine? Huge parts of the economy closed down. People, leisure, entertainment, hospitality, retail, all closed down for huge swathes the last 2 years. So the VAT take is going to be massively down. Council tax, well, we've had to pay that, haven't we? That carries on. Other taxes, home buying stamp duty. Okay, so if you look at all that and the way it's been impacted by COVID, you can see that debt is going to increase massively because this number, the amount in, is gone down hugely because of all the impact of COVID, and the amount out is only absolutely ballooned because of COVID. So these are not healthy signs. Okay, so I think it's a very, very precarious time for the UK economy. There's no way that this isn't going to take an enormous hit. It's destroyed all the revenue generating parts of the economy, or at least put them on hold or dampen them down. On the other hand, spending is ballooned. This is going to have to be repaid by tax, but we know the higher you tax, the more it destroys an economy. Your highest earners leave or find other arrangements, and it's very, very difficult to tackle this. That's why I think it's going to be a very, very poor time for the UK economy. So I thought I would look at, astrologically now, 3 charts from times when the UK economy was in a poor state. One is towards the end of World War II. One is in the between 73 and 74, around that area, where the country nearly went bankrupt and needed a bailout. And just have a look at some of the astrological influences. So this is the chart for 28 August 1945. It's the chart of the UK, and it's the solar arc for that period, but I'm also going to look at transits. So there were commonalities that I saw. First was, in all cases, Mars in the 8th house of debt was activated, and you'll see that right now as well. Another commonality was influence of the node, especially connected to Neptune. Also Pluto in relation to the sun or the ascendant was important, and in some cases Mercury. So we're looking for Neptune being activated, because Neptune in Scorpio is in the 2nd house. Neptune, of course, isn't always great with finances, represents debt. Scorpio is the extremes. Neptune indicates like quite a very difficult time for finances. It's in the 2nd house of the UK chart. Mars in the 8th house of lending also represents a propensity for problems and crises to do with lending. And of course, you know, Pluto ruling the 2nd house being involved is also kind of a financial indicator. So what we have in this chart are 3 things. First of all, transiting Pluto, which was, let's see, quite interestingly, transiting Pluto at the end of the war was here, end of Cancer. And it is, or should I say at this point, yeah, Pluto at this point, transiting Pluto was at 10 degrees of Leo, so it's squaring Mars in 11 degrees of Taurus. So that's the trigger of Mars we're looking for in the 8th house. You've got transiting Neptune, which was here on the ascendant, so the influence of Neptune representing this planet in the 2nd. We have, there you can see our solar arc progressed. Mercury is also triggering Mars, so it's 2 triggers on Mars. We also have solar arc Pluto right up there, which is also kind of, let's see what I have to say about that. Okay, let's leave out solar arc Pluto. Oh, I tell you why I put it there is because solar arc Pluto is exactly the opposite the position where Pluto is now, because it's at the end of Cancer, and Pluto right now is at the end of Capricorn. So we've got a common theme with the position of Pluto, either solar arc or transiting, which kind of feeds in. We have solar arc Neptune here, conjunct the node, which I said they're very important kind of synergies with Neptune and the node. And of course, 7th house is the house of open enemies, or also partners. So it could be partnerships, people you need to go in partnership with to borrow money. We've got solar arc ascendant, which is right here, conjunct Pluto. So again, I mentioned that there were Plutonian themes. Pluto rules the second house of money. Pluto is the planet of destruction, disaster, restructuring, crisis. And transiting Uranus, which was in Gemini at the time, is opposite Mercury. Okay, so a little bit of influence of Mercury. So let's have a look and see all the similarities when we look at the next chart, which takes us into the 70s. So here we have the UK chart, which is drawn up for, I did the 28th of August again, 1974, which was during another economic crisis, one of the most serious for the UK. Let's look at the theme. So we're looking for Pluto connecting with the Sun, and we have that because Pluto at the time is around about here. Transiting Pluto was in Libra, and it's squaring the Sun in Capricorn, right? So you've got that theme. You've also got Pluto being in Libra was very close to the ascendant. So again, the ruler of the money house is prominent. It's transiting Pluto on the ascendant and squaring the Sun. You've got Neptune transiting conjunct. Neptune is in Sagittarius. It's conjunct Mercury. So it's another trigger of Mercury, which we saw in the previous chart. We've got the solar arc node on the ascendant. So again, the north node is important. Is Mars going to be triggered? Yes, it is, by solar arc Neptune. So we've got that important trigger of Mars, which is prominent in all three. And we have here our solar arc Pluto triggering Saturn, which isn't common to the other charts, but it's very important because Pluto Saturn always represents a time of when things are lean, when you have to cut back, when you have to restructure, go back to basics, you know, when money is short. Now let's come up to today. There we have the UK chart, which is drawn up in terms of the solar arc for the 28th of August 2021, and let's see what we've got there. So interesting, on Mars we have both transiting Pluto and solar arc transiting Uranus, and solar arc Uranus both triggering Mars. So we got strong hits on Mars in Taurus in the 8th in all these charts. So that brings the previous financial crises in line with today astrologically. So we've got that going on. Also, the solar arc ascendant is not far from Mars as well. Let's have a look at solar arc Pluto, which is here. There you go. Solar arc Pluto is on the ascendant, just as transiting Pluto was in 1974. And that means it also will be gearing up to square the Sun. So you've got that Pluto-Sun connection again. We've got the solar arc midheaven conjunct Venus. There you go, solar arc midheaven conjunct Venus. That's a little bit different, but Venus does rule the 8th house because it's ruled by Taurus. So again, an indication of debt, crisis, transformation, problems. Let's look for a connection with Neptune and the node, and that is there too, because there you have your solar arc node conjunct Neptune, representing crises, disappointment, distress, disillusionment, debt, everything in the second house. Neptune is everything that's blurry, indistinct, that's cloak and dagger, there are problems, there's things are dissolving, and that's all in the house of the second, indicating financially things are totally unraveling for the UK. And lastly, we have solar arc Mars conjunct Mercury. Now I mentioned that Mercury was triggered in all of those, and this time it's triggered by solar arc Mars, very relevant with Mars being there in Taurus in the 8th house. So you can see there are strong synchronicities in the chart in terms of planets triggered, Mars particularly, Mercury particularly, Neptune with the node, Pluto connections with ascendant and the Sun in all these the two previous instances when the UK had serious financial trouble, and those are being echoed again today. So both astrologically and logically, I'm looking at this and saying this is a time of severe economic crisis for the UK. So let's keep our eye on it. So guys, thank you very much for watching. Remember, I've got a Rumble channel and BitChute, Odyssey, Library. I'll leave the links to them all, and I do have Patreon. If any of you guys are kind enough to donate, I'll put the link in there to my Patreon as well. I don't post there very often, but I probably should start. Hope you guys are well. Hope you're having a good Saturday and enjoying the nice September weather. Take care.